enormous game, 4,000 counters for a full week. And then it happened.
You're completely wrong about that.
No,
because
no,
we
no,
had,
no, listen.
You've got to understand what happened.
No, that's the design.
So, as I told you.
Yeah, no.
Oh my God.
Only you can prevent Tweezer tragedy.
Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. We had a small technical glitch because some news happening this week. So this is Counter Clipping show number 113 for February 27th, 2023. The date is incorrect in my notes, but I managed to catch it. So our topic for tonight is the new classics, and I'll talk about that in the fullness of time here. And we are drinking Lafroig Quarter Cask. We had some Lafroig courtesy of Doug over at the Tabletop's Edge at Winterfest last week. That is now concluded. It was a fulfilling yet exhausting week. Today we are clipping the newly arrived Bonaparte Overruns Piedmont from OSG. That will be the subject of an unboxing video that will be coming on the soon side. It's actually going to be next week's feature unboxing on Thursday. And I think it's not uploaded yet or edited or any of that, but we are nevertheless in good shape. So I'd like to remind everybody to please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed. And if you'd like to help support the channel, the best way to do that is via Patreon. There's a link to the Patreon page in the video description. So before we get any further, let me give a shout out to our guests so far tonight. 6 Actual, Abraxas FM, Brant from the Armchair Dragoons, Board Gaming Geezer, Brent McCabe, Brian, Chad Kennedy, Charles Latorra, Dale Brady, Daniel Silverthorne, Daniel Teets, Ed Holtzman, Eric Hansen, Garrison Venn, Hissy Cat Studio. Welcome the legendary Fucko, who will be guest starring in a video probably the week after Bonaparte Overruns Piedmont shows up. James Whitmer, Jeff Anderson, Jeff Beeler, Jeffrey Edwards, Joe Faust from sunny Northeast Ohio, Joe Okabayashi, John Stanley, John C., also blustery here in Northeast Ohio, by the way, John C. from the very sunny Philippines, John Clark, Kilroy of Kilroy Was Here, Is Here, Lee Grant, Manders, Mark McNair, Marty Sample, Matt Taylor, Mick Fuddpucker, Paul Grassmere, Ray Garby, Ray Musselman, Rick Cox, Rob Moffat, Rudy Amandara's Stacking Limit, Stigler, The Command Tent, Vince Ree, William Aarons, and William Bird. So sorry if I have missed anybody. Colby area, I know that I missed you. And Stigler, somehow YouTube did not tell me that Stigler was here. So Stigler, you'll be delighted to hear that tonight we have something from your favorite publisher. Let me try and fuss with this here. Is this going to work? That's not going to work. That didn't work. How about that? Nope, that's worse. Okay, we'll stick with this. So let me turn the banners on and point out that we've got two new swordsman level patrons, Frank Davis and Chris Anthony, a new warrior level patron, Robert Bike, who let me know if I'm mispronouncing that. And a big thanks to David Zell for boosting to the hero level. So let's put that up. And as usual, all the socials links are in the video description, except for the Discord. The link to that can be found in the ticker right now. And there's also a contact email address for me if you, for some reason, do not have it. So you could reach out to me once that link expires, and I could shoot you an invite should that be necessary. So pretty excited about Bonaparte Overruns Piedmont. It is the literally smallest game in terms of counter count in the entire series so far. In that it is only one counter sheet. So we are absolutely going to finish clipping the units tonight. I won't do the markers because I've got trays and trays and trays of markers for this series already. And we don't need any more. And I don't know that there's, I'll clip the ones that are unique to this particular module. We're having autofocus problems again, son of a bitch. Yes, it's gross here in Ohio. So all right, usually that causes it to fix itself. If I didn't squirm around so much in the chair, that would not happen. So I'd like to, for those who haven't watched last week's show, that's probably amounts to just about nobody. Check that out. We had a terrific show with pretty much zero technical difficulties, thanks to some adjustments I made and some digging that I did to ensure that it would not be a fiasco this year like it was last year. We had a number of interesting guests very briefly on the show, including Chip Saltzman, Tony Burkett from the OCS development team, and the legendary Dean Essig. So check that out. Before we get any further, though, we've got all kind of wargaming news, but I have a public service announcement.
The scene, Winterfest 2020. Players have been working on this enormous game, 4,000 counters, for a full week. And then it happened.
Totally, completely wrong about that.
No,
because
no,
we
no,
had,
no. No, listen.
You've got to understand what happened here, Tony.
No, that's a designer.
So, as I told you,
Yeah, no.
Oh my God!
Only you can prevent Tweezer tragedy.
So I hope that is useful to everybody. They were able to recover from it. I don't know that anybody is going to put money on the fact that every counter is in the exact same position that it was in, but they did the best they could. They weren't going to derail a week's worth of game for like 12 people. There was talk of a GoFundMe to remove the tweezers from Tony's neck after managing to do that. So the people who were responsible for that part of the line had to, because they were the people who knew where stuff was, they had to kind of sort it out, and they did. So it wasn't too bad. And I would like to give a special shout out to Roy, whose idea this fabulous public service announcement was. So we had a great time at Winterfest, and I've got pictures. But first, we have news. So let me hop over to that first. So first up, for the RPG folks, the Harnworld hardcover is on Kickstarter. It's got 14 days left. This is basically the basic setting. This is a system neutral setting. You use it for D&D, you can use it for RuneQuest, you can use it for whatever you want, whatever game system you like. It is a system that I've done a decent amount of video on, and they had never done hardcovers. It was all loose leaf stuff for years and years and years. So they're getting into hardcovers now on Kickstarter. There wasn't really an argument, by the way. It was just kind of somebody pontificating, waving tweezers around, and somebody else waving their hands around, and the hands collided, and the tweezers went flying, and there was no to prevent the tweezers from hitting the board, which they did. So, so it was plus grand disorder, as Alistair Logie points out. So check this out. I will put a link to the Kickstarter in the chat. I didn't think to put it. I did think to put it in the video description, and I just ran out of time. So it's coming to the chat. So if you're interested in that, check this out. There is also, I can't show you this yet because it's not live till tomorrow, the long-awaited Song for War Kickstarter. That's World War II in the Mediterranean. In a game that the designers describe as Axis and Allies on steroids, I wouldn't put it that way. I think that's underselling it and implying a level of complexity that's not really there. So check that out. Song for War will be on Kickstarter tomorrow. And I've had those guys on the channel, and I'm sure we'll have them on again at some point. Next up is, what other news did we have? Oh, so STL files for Swordsman and up-level patrons. I will have some new files up by the end of the week. I will put a patrons-only post up for that when that occurs. So we will be adding new STL 3D models to that repository every month. I've got a couple of things lined up for March. We have a big, I'm going to talk about this at the end, and I'm not going to tell you any more than I'm telling you right now. So there's a really big, really significant thing happening on the channel on Thursday, March 2nd at 9 p.m. So you will want to buy your tickets for that right now. You don't actually have to buy tickets. You can just watch, but you know what I'm saying. You may want to set some time aside on Thursday, March 2nd, aside for that show. It's going to be cool. So the next thing up is the GMT update. So this was from the 24th, I believe. I was at Winterfest when this happened. I, of course, was, read the update, and, some important things happened here. Dale Brady, thanks very much. Much appreciated. Beginner game in the series. This would be a good beginner game in the series, to be honest about it. It's real small, but most of the games in the series are suitable for beginners. There is no significant leap in complexity between the various games. Truthfully, the first game I recommend that people get is Napoleon's Wheel. And the reason for that is that it comes with the universal card decks that you otherwise would have to buy separately from OSG. You get the decks once in Napoleon's Wheel, and you don't have to buy them again. Napoleon's Wheel also has a good mix of really big, famous battles and really quite small, less famous, but not necessarily less important battles. So my recommendation is stay away from Leipzig or Napoleon against Russia. Other than that, you're pretty okay. But be prepared to buy the decks if you want the decks. The decks are optional. You don't have to play with them, but I think you should at least try to play with the decks to see if you like them. So, Jeff Beeler, tune in at 9 p.m. and find out. So Fistmas is like the Stigler points out it's kind of like the intro game. It is sort of set up as it's one battle in a Ziploc bag. So in terms of lowest entry point, spending the least money to try out the series, then yes, Fistmas is the perfect one, I suppose. But I don't think Fistmas is a particularly you couldn't do a standalone game with just that in it. Let me put it that way. Of course, they kind of did, but it's the intro pack. I would rather I'd rather point somebody to a game that has additional battles in it as well. So Stigler had a box printed for his copy. That's pretty cool. Stigler, I'd love to see pictures of that, actually. All right, so GMT update. As usual, I'm not going to read this thing verbatim. If you want to read this thing verbatim, go check it out on GMT's website. I'm going to hit the highlights. Last 100 yards basic training. This is a pretty interesting sounding system that I kind of want to check out, and it's kind of never quite been at the top of the priority list to do so. Playdeck has Twilight Struggle Red Sea coming out like really, really soon. That's going to be a digital version for those who are interested in that. New 3-player variant for Urban Sprawl. This is a team game of U.S. Civil War. I think this is happening on Board Game Geek. That's pretty cool. Commands and Colors reprints we've already covered. We are going to not cover that again. They're consolidating the boxes. New P500s. We'll talk about this consolidation in a second. Combat Commander Europe and the Mediterranean Master Edition. Order and Opportunity, Combat Commander Minor Nations Battle Pack, and North Africa 41 mounted maps. Let's try and keep these straight. And the Board for People Power. It is an attractive map, in my opinion. Very distinctive graphic design here. I'm not sure that it's going to resonate with wargamers, but it is a coin game, and I'm not sure that necessarily resonates with every wargamer either, right? So we're going to talk about that today, actually. Jason Card GMT1 update. New Vassal modules or new versions of Vassal modules. New from Hexasim in stock at GMT is the new reprint of Austerlitz 1805 Rising Eagles. That's the Eagles of France series. Great War Commander BEF expansion. That's also from Hexasim. And this Japanese game from Hexasim in France. This is gorgeous. I just can't pronounce it, at least not today. Newly issued Waterloo 1815 Fallen Eagles 2. Now, this is a revision and not just a reprint. New maps. They actually redid the graphics on the maps to match the graphical style of the other games in the series. And I believe that may have happened to the counters as well. Designer interviews. Candace Harris talks to Jason Matthews. El Wargamero Novato, which is a fantastic channel name. It talks to Justin Facino, designer of Seljuk. And Mitch Land, designer of Next War Iran. Dan the Dancing Man from No Enemies Here. Talk to Jeff Horger and Mark Rodrigue. And I'm probably mispronouncing Mark's name as well. And I talked to Justin as well. Justin's a fine young lad, and we like him very much. And the Players Aid talked to Ted Racer. That is a print interview and not a video interview. New GMT merchandise, cool looking shirts. I kind of like the Nevsky shirt. That's kind of cool. Got sleds. That's cute. All right. So new P500 editions. So apparently in the development of Combat Commander, and I didn't know this, they actually tested it as one big package of Europe and the Mediterranean. And it got broken up probably just for sheer size reasons. Well, they're putting it back together. So moving forward, the new edition of Combat Commander core set will have both Europe and the Mediterranean. However, both Europe and the Mediterranean are on P500 right now, and there are orders open for them. So they are going to print a small number of individual Europe or the Mediterranean boxes, along with the Europe plus the Mediterranean Master Edition, so that the people who are missing one or the other, but don't want to rebuy the whole thing, don't have to rebuy the whole thing. They can just get the piece that they are missing. We also have this Combat Commander Minor Nations Battle Pack, mounted maps for North Africa 41, which, you have heard my opinion on those, and Order and Opportunity. So let's take a look at Order and Opportunity, because this looks actually pretty cool. This is a design by VPJ Arponen, and it's a game about, let me see if I can, it's like post-Cold War politics, right? It looks similar-ish to Twilight Struggle, but reading this page, I think it sounds pretty interesting. And this is something that I will keep an eye on with an eye toward ordering it. So Marty Sample says $99 for both Combat Commander core games is a steal. Yes, but bear in mind that that's the P500 price. It's going to be $150 if you buy it after the fact. Anyway, Order and Opportunity looks pretty cool. I'm interested in seeing more of this. And hopefully we will get to do that in soon. Let's put it that way. Okay, so here's the new P500 editions. New P500s on the horizon. They're being a bit direct here this time. A new post-1970s operational combat game set in Europe. Okay, maybe that'll be interesting, and maybe I won't be interested in it at all. We will see. A multi-pack of games set in South America. I don't know that this is a coin thing, but I suspect that it is a coin thing. A new Twilight Struggle theater game, somewhat like Twilight Struggle Red Sea, and a new GBACW game. The rumors say that is going to be the Wilderness, which would be cool. Can't wait to see that. For some reason, I think the Wilderness. Well, not for some reason. There's two. Line of Battle has the Wilderness coming as well, and that's likely to hit pre-order this year, at least if talking to Dean and listening to the people at Multiman is any indication. So, coming events: SD HistCon, GMT East. I believe GMT East is at a new location now. Here's some video. Here's some pictures of various things, including the expansion for Red Flag over Paris. We're working down our way to the production outlook here. Okay, so current charges and shipments. Battle of White Plains. This stuff started shipping earlier. Well, now last week. Let me put it that way. Battle of White Plains, Paths of Glory Deluxe, second printing. Sekigahara, fifth printing. We'll talk about that here tonight. Last 100 Yards, Volume 1, second printing. The next charges will be early to mid-March, and they will include Ancient Civilizations of the Middle East, second printing of Atlantic Chase, Clash of Sovereigns, and the Grand Prix New Track Pack. Probably personally should order Clash of Sovereigns, but we'll see. Things are kind of tight right now, to be completely honest about it. All right. So other than that stuff, things that have newly arrived at the printer: Liberty or Death, third printing, the Barracks Emperors, and Under the Southern Cross. Under the Southern Cross is another one that I definitely want. Bear in mind that this is a different Under the Southern Cross than the Bill Cooper game, which I think is called Beneath the Southern Cross, which is coming from Compass, and which is a new take on Flat Top. More about Flat Top, too, in a little bit. Going to the printer this month: Banish All Their Fears, North Africa 41, and Plantagenet. North Africa 41, of course, being, I've got two lids here, being the new Simonich operational title. Those are always exciting when those come out. Plantagenet is a new entry in the Levian campaign series. So that is a series that's kind of happening right now. There we go. I gonna feel like a whole counter tray for this is a little overkill for this particular game. Then again, it won't be too big. Joe Perez asks if the Wilderness will fit on 4 maps. I think so, but I'll let Stigler weigh in on that for GBACW. They should have the two games should have a similar footprint. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it'll fit on 4 maps. I'm not quite as sure it'll fit on 2 maps. Mo from Mo's Gaming Table is here. Mo, thanks for stopping by. In Final Art, newly arrived in Final Art is Downfall. That is a collaboration between the late Chad Jensen and John Butterfield. New in the art department, Fields of Fire Deluxe, Norman Conquest, which is the new Men of Iron game, which of course I'm looking forward to big time. Rebel Fury, which I'm not sure I knew that this was quite this far along. This is the Mark Herman, I think, quad pack or whatever it's called. There may actually be five battles in it. So that's going to be interesting. Sovereign of Discord, which is a Fire in the Lake expansion, which I am on the hook for. Last 100 Yards, the Russian Front, and Vijaya Nagara, which is, I believe, a coin-inspired game. I'm not sure if you'd call it actual coin or not. I'd have to refresh my memory on that. All right, so here is the content creators who are doing stuff about GMT games. I think my thing here is to the interview with Justin. Here is the cover for Under the Southern Cross, which is Flying Colors Volume 4. I spent a lot of time talking last week in a fairly loud volume, so here's the cover for North Africa 41. I think we may have seen that before. Here's the final map or near final map for North Africa 41. Here's the counter sheet. This may be all the counters for that. And the Plum Island Horror, which is, I think, a great retro cover, by the way. This is a design by Herman Luttman. and a variety of other things and graphics and stuff like that. I see no news being reported here on the Barbarossa front. So even though Barbarossa Army Group North has 1,156 pre-orders, and Army Group South has over 1,000, I don't know that there's any news to report on that front. Best place for that news is going to be on the East Front Series Consim World Group, to be honest, which I haven't looked in on lately. All right, so that's the GMT update. So let's pull that down and pull up the picture show from Winterfest, because we wrapped Winterfest. So I'm going to have some. There'll actually be an AAR video, but I haven't edited that yet. From our game, I do have the AAR video from Ostfront that will debut next week. Mo, I'd be delighted were this to be, and I mean, I know Vance and company are still working on them, and I'd be delighted if it shows up this year. But I would not necessarily put money on it being this year, if you know what I'm saying. All right, so I'll be delighted to buy them whenever they come out. Okay, so here what we have is, so what I played all week was Decision Games Wacht am Rhein, and I know Stigler will be delighted to hear that the game went well. This is the Gauss system. It's a quite heavy system. I am not even sure I've taken a sip of this yet. There we go. This is the Gauss system. It is a very heavy system. You do get used to it. And I think we didn't have any catastrophic rules fuck-ups, but we did have a couple things that we needed to fix. There are 3 turns per day, 1 mile per hex, and units are battalions, but you can basically break units up as much as you want. So we didn't really do that too much. Maybe we should have done that more. I would have done that more in a different position in the game than I was in. I played German 7th Army. That's a German army in the South sector, which is a almost entirely infantry force. And I was pretty aggressive with them. And we'll see some pictures of that. This is also includes a shot of the 3D printed army and corps boundary markers, which I have an improved version of that may actually come off the printer as early as tonight. We'll see. Here's another shot. We were playing with maps that had been blown up by a local blueprint printer by 130%. This map is, I'll be blunt, it's attractive. It's very attractive. In fact, Joe Youst map, it's also pretty hard to play on. There's a lot of real hairy terrain, and I don't just mean that, hey, it's tough terrain to fight through. It's tough terrain to read on the map. You've got tracks for which the symbol looks a lot like the symbol for constricted terrain. You've got tracks that enter a hex and then leave the hex through that same hex side before going into the corner of a different hex. And it's really kind of a pain in the ass. So some more attention could have been paid to map fidelity here. And that may be happening with the more recent games in the series. This was, after all, the first game in the series. We did have a good time with it. We got to December 23rd in our Wacht am Rhein game. The Germans reached the Meuse, made several attempts to cross on the 22nd and 23rd, and did not succeed. And probably at that point, the Americans were poised for a big counterattack. Jeff Beeler, you are absolutely right. We will be incorporating this suggestion as soon as I can actually get the filament changed and get the print job queued. That's absolutely right. All right, so next up, there was a Mark Simonich operational Zachbond marathon. The first game that they played was Stalingrad 42. They did play this to completion. I'm not sure who won, but it's a great game. This was a full game that was played of NATO. The Cold War goes hot from Compass Games. This ended on went to the very last turn and ended up with a giant pile of NATO casualties. This game is very good. But it is also it was bloody. Let me put it that way. This may actually be true. I mean, the Gauss maps are fairly busy. Now, I'll be honest. That was not something that bothered me very much playing on the Normandy maps. On the Wacht am Rhein maps, it's difficult. And I wonder if you could simply play Wacht am Rhein on the Time for Trumpets maps. I suspect that you could. We talked about the red and blue markers, and we like them for certain things, for like markers, and we don't like them for other things like fortifications and fieldworks. If like the prepared attack markers, cool, it's red stands out, but like the fieldwork should be the same color as the units. This is another Civinage game that was set up on a table. I'm not sure how far they got. This looks like the initial setup of Normandy 44. Great game. This is one of a number of pictures we got. I didn't take a million pictures of this, of the giant OCS Ostfront game. This table was a table that they literally built on site with wood that had been pre-cut, so that they wouldn't have any table jarring or anything like that. And then they had a flying tweezer mishap. So, but the game went good other than the flying tweezer mishap. And you can see you got Crimea all the way to Leningrad here. This table is about 15 feet long, I want to say, and about 5.5 feet wide. This is the OCS Forgotten Battles game, which was a parallel game that was happening. This actually wasn't Curtis's table. Curtis brought his table too, but that was, and Curtis may have masterminded this for all I know, but he didn't put it together. A team of other people put it together, and it went together pretty fast, other than all the hammer drills going off, annoying everybody else in the room. Anyway, Forgotten Battles went well as well. The front did move quite a bit during the course of the week. This is Europa Universalis, the new version from whoever put that fancy Kickstarter thing out. It's real fancy and was real expensive, and the folks playing it seemed to feel that it was very complicated. I'm a little less convinced of that, but we were playing Goss all week, so what do I know? This is Desert Victory, the game from Trevor Bender in the latest C3I. This was a game that was being played around the first weekend alongside Battle for Kursk. So you had two guys, and when one person was taking his turn on Desert Victory, the other person would be taking his turn on Battle for Kursk, and they would swap back and forth. So that actually works pretty well. This was the Empires in Arms game, which I am. Oh, you'll see the electric dice rollers. Those were enforced at the Goss table. We sadly did not actually get any progress done on this. We kind of assigned sides and then picked where armies went, and then we just didn't do anything else. And the time when we would have had to fool with this was on Friday, and we ended up doing flat top on Friday instead. Here's some more action down in my sector. Germans driving toward Edelbrook, and I want to say the Allies beat the Germans to Edelbrook, but the Germans got there in force and managed to eject the Allies from Edelbrook. And we held on to it for essentially the entire rest of the game. Here's some more Wacht am Rhein. This might have been at night or possibly when I turned the table off to minimize the glare, which, as you could see, did not work. More Wacht am Rhein. I mean, had I had my druthers in time to pick the filaments and plan test prints and all that, I would probably not have chosen pink for the core boundary color scheme. So 999th was not in my sector, so I do not know. We'll see more pictures of these boundary markers later on, as the case may be. So lots of pictures of Wacht am Rhein here, obviously, because that's the table I was sitting at. Now, this is another Europa Universalis thing. There's these like little status mats that come with the game that are on a thin cardboard that is susceptible to warping. I feel like that's lame. Game that costs $200 probably should have better components than this. Some of the components are really nice. The meeples are really nifty, for example. There's like little plastic ships. Those look cool. But I was displeased with this. More of the warping things with the cool meeples and the cool ships. This is a in development game. Ken Reppel, the designer, was there for a few days playtesting this. Saratoga Turning Point 1777. This is fairly far along. Ken's been working on it for a couple of years now. So I would keep an eye out for this if you're interested in tactical or grand tactical American Revolution. This was a game of. I'm drawing a blank now. Somebody will tell me. Jim Ozarski is in the chat. Welcome back. Um, 5 minutes to midnight. That's what this is. It took me a minute to think of it. The folks playing this say they liked it a lot. Here is. What was this? Russian campaign. I believe this is the new version from GMT. 2 minutes to midnight, 5 minutes to midnight. What's the difference? Here's Forgotten Battles again with the fancy dice tower. Here is a scene from could have been Ostfront, could have been Forgotten Battles, not sure. Here's Normandy 44 after they got started. This would be Stalingrad 42. This would be Ostfront. This would be Ostfront. Now check out these stack keepers that somebody had 3D printed and brought too. Those are kind of interesting. But they do turn your half-inch counters into 5/8-inch counters, and that may not work on the map. And it certainly didn't work on this map. So obviously, this is obviously true. So I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of bananas. So here we have, this would be Ostfront as well. So Ostfront, of course, incorporates Forgotten Battles. More Russian campaign. This is Forgotten Battles. This is Sword of Rome, which got played, which looks pretty cool. I've got it, have had it for years, have not had the chance to play it. So it is on the shelf of shame. This is right before German 7th Army managed to pocket U.S. 4th Infantry Division and combat command of what looks like 9th Armored against the map edge, where they remained for most of the rest of the game. They got broken out in the last, say, 2 turns. But by then, they had been eroded away. High Command gave me the Führer Begleit Brigade, which turned out to have performed fairly well, unlike historically. And they sent me the 150th Panzer Brigade, which performed as poorly as historically, except that it got ground into hamburger instead of being ignominiously withdrawn after a while. Some more pictures of that. This is Operation Theseus from VUCA Simulations. These guys were playing for several days at this. I'm not sure if it was one game or they played several games in succession. But unfortunately, one of the guys decided he had COVID and had to leave. So we all got exposed to COVID. So there's that. So I'm fine. My wife's fine. We had it back in November. So I think we're okay. And we were all there already. So there didn't see, unless, you knew you had it. Then they left immediately. So I support that. But there was no sense in anybody else leaving at that point. We'd all been sitting in the same room for 3 days already. But nobody had played with or really interacted with the guy who ended up saying he had COVID. Here are some more of those stack keepers. No, I'd call it a wall of shame. It's not a whole wall. It's a quarter of a wall. I track that differently than most people do. I track by series. So OCS gets a check mark. Yes, I've played it, even though I've only played about 10 of the games. This is Black Orchestra. They played 2 games of this. They won one, killed Hitler, and they lost the other one. Everybody died in a gulag prison. This is Nevsky, which was done as a side game, and I'm not sure how far they got in it, but it looks great. Very much would like to play this at some point, and I just haven't gotten to it. This was World War II, Barbarossa to Berlin, which is Ted Racer point to point. Looks a lot like Paths of Glory, to be completely honest. I'm not sure how closely it resembles Paths of Glory, but it does look a lot like Paths of Glory, except that it's World War II, and it starts in 1941, which is not the first. Well, it is the first, I think, but Ted has done at least one other. Hey, we're going to do all of World War II in Europe, but we're not going to start in 1939 games. The other being Fall of the Third Reich from Compass, which I have and which looks pretty good, which has some interesting mechanisms in it too. I may as well point out. They made slow progress on this as a side game, but I think they did make some progress. But that may be the only picture of it that I have. More Vakdam Rhine. There, as you can see, is one of the legendary electric dice rollers for those so soft they can't roll their own dice. That's what we used on the Vakdam Rhine table. You'll also see the 3D printed bits trays. Now, those are a model that you could just go download off of Thingiverse, so you don't need to get those from me. But they're super duper handy, and every time I change the filament, I'm pretty much printing 2 of those trays. And that is going to apply to the filament change that will be happening probably tomorrow as well. Actually thinking about it, that may result in that filament change happening on Wednesday. So thinking about that. More Vakdam Rhine, some fairly poorly oriented photography on my part. Here's a really good look at the boundary markers. Actually, I think that's why I took this particular picture. Actually, because I wanted a good shot of the boundary markers. But these would be the army level markers. The core ones are shaped a little differently. I'm not sure if that's actually, maybe you can from this shot. You may be able to see that the core markers are a little shorter, quite a bit shorter. I mean, they're noticeably shorter. Is that all the counters I need on this? I think it is. This is the OCS tweezer disaster. These are the actual photographs and not from the reenactment. And these did feature in the public service announcement video, which you may be seeing a lot of, to be honest. So they had to clean this catastrophe up. Also notice these. This is I might have gotten another shot of this actually. There's these. I hope I did. So one of the OCS folks brought these clear OCS markers that had been custom made for them by Litco. And they're really pretty neat. A little bit pricey to have done. Stigler, I don't actually agree with you on that. I think you mean art and not graphic design. This is generally good graphic design with some exceptions, even if you don't like the art. So more catastrophe pictures. Here's another picture of Vakdam Rhine, which is again poorly oriented on my part. This point, this is the area around Bastogne. They had driven 10th Armored Division into Bastogne, and by the time we got up there in anything resembling any force, they had 2 full divisions there that were already starting to dig in. There was no way we were going to dislodge them, so we had to drive around them. And here is a good shot of the northern line near the end of the first SS Panzer Division's drive. They didn't really get much further west than this. Somebody had these little trays to keep units and off-map air bases and supply and stuff in the game. That was an interesting idea that I might be looking into. Here's actually a good shot at the Gauss markers. As you can see, this was some pretty small print on that. Here's a game of Iron Curtain. I'm not sure how far this got. Here is a game of Baptism by Fire. This was kind of set up as a noodly learning game by a couple of folks who seemed interested in BCS. So they set up next to us, and on that, and by us, I mean playing on that side of the Vakdam Rhine table was me, and I've been playing BCS for months now. And Doug from the Tabletop's Edge, who is probably YouTube's foremost expert on BCS, even though he hasn't played it in a few months, but it's pretty fresh for me. So we were able to help him out, and he seems very high on the system now. Here's another shot of Germans having reached the Meuse. So sort of the high water mark. We got something stuck in my throat here. It's probably COVID. We did get 116th Panzer, more or less in its entirety, up to the Meuse to make the attempted crossings, but the attempted crossings were attempted and not successful. More Vakdam Rhine. Here is a game of Liberty or Death that happened, which I didn't even talk to any of those people, so I have no idea. So Garrison Venn asked why silhouettes and NATO symbols on Gauss counters. So what that actually means something for Gauss. If it has a silhouette on it, it's considered an armor unit for a number of purposes in the game, including defending against artillery barrages and stuff like that. So Gauss would be an example of a system where that actually means something. There are actually counters. I don't know that I have pictures of any that are clear, but there are also counters that are like mixed battalions where there's an infantry complement or a panzer grenadier complement and an armor complement, and those will have both a silhouette and a NATO symbol on them. And that means that it is a mixed unit. More Gauss. I'm looking for one of those mixed units now. Unlikely to see any of that in my. Oh, here's one right here. Actually, if you look at that that unit out of 116th Panzer, you'll see that there's a Panzer Grenadier company or two and a tank company or two making up that battalion. So that is exactly the thing that I am talking about. More Damrine. Here is the customary Friday flat top game. Some folks asked about, hey, what version of the game is this? This is the battle line version, but we actually had 3 copies of this thing set up. And this was the battle line one. Joe Perez asks, is that like the dual units in BCS? I think it's intended to represent the same thing, yes, but it doesn't. Dual units don't have the same capabilities in BCS as they do in Gauss. If you read Dean's designer's notes on BCS, all of the things that he has to say about traditional war games at the battalion level apply to Gauss, which is detailed and has some novel ideas in it, but is ultimately a pretty conventional design of simulation by minutia is what I like to call it. I believe that's a term I came up with in the last week or so. More Walk Dam Rhine. I do think that we beat the historical German performance in all 3 sectors, actually. I think Piper got further than he did historically. 116th Panzer, that center section definitely did. And German 7th Army definitely did as well. So I have no reason to be displeased. We did not bother adding up the points at the end. The little hex tables are for weather patterns. Those are cloud banks, and if they collide, you'll get a storm. Here's the giant shit pile. This may be the simulated shit pile. This is TSWW Singapore. This is about 1/3 of the total, maybe half of the total map area. And it is here sitting on what I believe to be 4 folding tables. We would have had to haul more folding tables from the other end of the room to get probably as many as 3 or 4 more folding tables to get this all set up. This is pretty far from the most practical game system, right? You got all the Southeast Asia and Indonesia at 15 miles to the hex, all the way west to clear to India. So it's enormous and looks quite nice, I think. But, just in terms of the map graphics. And I think that is the last of the Winterfest pictures. So let me get rid of this. And I'll take a drink of water because my voice is wrecked again. You'd have to build a custom table for this is what it would come down to be honest about it. And if you did one that would exactly fit the map layout, then you might not need, oh dear. You might not need a Tom Cruise rig to reach the middle of the map. Maybe judgment is withheld on that. So, all right. So let me pull up the actual presentation. And we're going to start talking about the new classics. I'm going to do these in alphabetical order, not alphabetical order, but order by release year. And it goes further west than Colombo, Jeff. You weren't able to see that on that map though, because the India maps were it was too big to set those up. So, um, Darwin to Colombo might actually be the Darwin part of it might actually be correct. So, I agree. So the criteria here is basically things that we think are classics that have released since the demise of Avalon Hill, and yet are at least 5 years old, giving us therefore some perspective on how well they hold up. So the date range here is 1998 to 2018. There's a couple things that I think are in the running for this that released after 2018, but they released after 2018. So I think the jury is still out on them. That's not a judgment against those games. It's just that I don't think time has quite given us enough perspective on them yet. So they're disqualified because of their youth, if you will. So I am doing this in. Am I doing this in the correct order? Hold on. I think I am. Yes. No. All right. Well, we'll do it in this order. So I'm doing this in order of year of release. A lot of these are chosen, I think, because of influence, and not necessarily because they're like massively popular games. Some of them are actually a little bit obscure, and you'll know which ones I mean when we get to them. I'm not sure that would even fit on a wall, to be completely honest about it. Jeff Beeler, and I want to hear what everybody in the chat has to say about what are the new classics. So Jeff Beeler says, For the People, Paths of Glory, Panzer Grenadier, Memoir 44, Empire of the Sun, Twilight Struggle, Commands and Colors, Ancients, Case Blue, Labyrinth, Space Empires, 4X. I'm going to have a little bit of a different take on that, but there's a bunch of overlap in here too. For example, I'm on the record as not having had a good experience with Panzer Grenadier, for example. But that is not to say that there aren't people that like it, because there are. So I am happy to be outvoted on that as long as I am not forced to play it. Then it's all cool. For the People is, I feel, the sort of first true full flowering of the card-driven game mechanic. And this actually was released first originally by Avalon Hill. So I'm cheating a little bit here. But it is in the date range too, at least according to Board Game Geek. So if it was, it might have been released in the last year of Avalon Hill's existence. I have been some of that period is a bit of a haze for me too, in terms of wargaming. But I was wargaming clear up to about 1990. Maybe 2003 or something like that. And then I dropped out for 5 or 8 years or something like that. So, but I've managed to catch up to some extent on what's been, what went on in the years that I missed. So I have played For the People. It is an absolute classic. It is a wonderful card-driven game on the U.S. Civil War, super duper influential, among other things. It's a big influence on U.S. Civil War. Which is another game I like a lot. Frankly, I think there's some ideas in here that could be applied elsewhere, if you know what I mean. Brant will talk about this in a bit as well. So I did have to kind of work to make this not what was Mark Herman up to in these years, right? Nevertheless, Mark does have a couple entries in this list. So that really shouldn't surprise anybody. Next up is Paths of Glory. Okay, this is a 1999 release according to my information, and a Ted Racer game from GMT. There's a new edition out with a new map that's getting reprinted. It's on P500 list right now, but that wasn't a question, meandering Mike. I'm aware that it was first published by Avalon Hill, but then I noticed that it was 1998, which was my, I guess, first year that we're talking about. Need to drink more water. Phil B says U.S. Civil War over For the People, and I'm not sure I agree. I'm not sure I disagree. I think they're both really good games, and I think they're fairly different. I have both of them and don't plan to unload either of them. But I can see having a preference for one or the other just based on the kinds of games that they are. Paths of Glory is another card-driven game. This is what I will call the Ted Racer school of CDGs. There are a number of elements in here that have been borrowed that are not unique to Paths of Glory because they've been borrowed by a number of other games, including things like Triumph of Chaos and 1866 back here behind me, and a bunch of other things. Is this better? Yeah, maybe. We'll see. Jeff Beeler says, in that time, he mostly played Great War at Sea, Second World War at Sea, and Fifth Frontier War. Now, I haven't played them, but it looks to me like that Second World War at Sea has a lot going for it. And I believe Brant will chime in on that, whether we're going to have that in the wargaming area at Origins again this year or not. We have for the last year or two. All right, next up, and let me also mention Paths of Glory here for sort of revitalizing the World War I wargaming scene. That was a giant dead spot in wargaming for a long time because so many people's first experience with World War I games were with 1914 from Avalon Hill or with Guns of August from Avalon Hill, both of which are interesting simulations and not super duper fun to play. Even Guns of August, which I have fond memories of and would kind of like to revisit at some point just to see if, what I would think of it now. It locks up and bogs down and is a slog to play, right? Dimsdale says, created it. It certainly created the boom in World War I games that we have today. And actually, terminology-wise, I think that's probably a little bit better. Because like I said, before it was pretty rare to see a World War I war game because everybody said, oh, World War I, that's going to be boring. Because that was what their previous experience with it had said. You didn't see none, but you see a lot more now. Next up, I have to compare next up, yet another card-driven game. There's a lot of card-driven games in here because I think card-driven games are one of the really major movements that happen in this period and that really start to take off at the beginning of this period with We the People and For the People, slightly before the beginning of this period for We the People. This is the Napoleonic Wars from GMT. Now, I'd have to look at my copy to look at the credits here, but designer Don Greenwood, Ben Knight, Mark McLaughlin. I believe this to just be a Mark McLaughlin design, and I'm not sure what the other two gentlemen involvement was, but I'd be happy to be corrected on that. I'm just not looking. I'm not going to go grab it off the shelf during the show. Let me put it that way. So this is really interesting. It's a CDG, and it's from what I will call the Napoleonic Wars school of CDG, which is kind of another sub-thread inside CDGs that share a lot of common mechanics. Other games that share a lot of common mechanics with this would be things like Here I Stand and Virgin Queen and the upcoming Sovereign of Discord. This is unlike the other two that we've already mentioned in that this is potentially at least a multiplayer game. And in fact, it is a very good multiplayer game. You might get upset that it runs completely off the historical rails, which it tends to do multiplayer, but it plays quite well multiplayer, unlike, say, War and Peace, which is also a Mark McLaughlin design, which does not necessarily play well multiplayer depending on the scenario you've chosen. Most of the scenarios actually work pretty good in War and Peace, regardless of number of players, but the campaign game multiplayer does not. So, is there a way for me to... It doesn't look like it. Anyway, so this is a really good game. It is also, unlike something like Here I Stand, which is very sensitive to the number of players. Here I Stand really only works as well as it should at 6 players. You can play it with 3. There is a 2-player variant, which I've never tried. With 4 or 5, find a different game. It just doesn't work with 4 or 5, and really only sings at 6. Napoleonic Wars you could play with 2, you could play with 3, you could play with 4, 5, 6. You might even be able to fit 7 people at this table if you give somebody the Turks. So you can do a lot with this game. and make it work regardless of the number of players that you have. So it's a great multiplayer game. It's a great convention game. Jeff Beeler, this is a good point, actually. Ted was working on World War I in Command magazine, including Great War in Europe, which I have played. The original Command magazine version I played. Well prior to Paths of Glory. So Ted was interested in this topic before that, but it was not taken off. And some of those are really good games, actually. When Eagles Fight is a really good game. 1918 Storm in the West is supposed to be a good game, but I haven't played it. And 1914 Glory's End is a pretty good game. And those all were Command magazine games from Ted prior to Paths of Glory. But Paths of Glory is the game that proved to the community that World War I games could be fun and engaging and not a dire slog to play. You did not have to convince Ted. Oh dear. Joe Perez talking about A Mighty Fortress. So this is a fascinating game, and of course, a major inspiration for Here I Stand. And that's not on this list, and I think it easily could be, but I felt like I had enough games on this model. In fact, I probably should have picked that over Napoleonic Wars. But I picked Napoleonic Wars because it's more flexible. The mounted map's not really a mounted map, though, is it, Perfidious Albion? It's a cardstock map on a slightly thicker cardboardy paper. That's not a kind of thing that GMT does nowadays. And that's not a map material that I like because, frankly, it has all of the disadvantages of both mounted and unmounted maps. Just give me a paper map if you're going to do that to me. Lamps are going out, yes, but that is like 20 years later. So that's why it is not making the list. Although it, I think, does fall in the date range. Next up is Bonaparte at Marengo. This is by Rachel Simmons, released by Simmons Games in 2005. And as far as I could tell, it's the first Simmons game that uses this mechanism. A very similar mechanism is used in Guns of Gettysburg. This is a really interesting game, and you really see it when you look at the map, and you realize that this kind of makes you look like you're looking at one of those military situation maps, right? It actually works to kind of lay out the units with frontage or march them up the road in column. It's actually really neat. There's been a number of other games that have borrowed this idea since then. This has been a very influential but not big selling design because these things are hard to get. Looks okay to me, Matt Taylor. Could just be you. I skipped the Austerlitz game because this one came out first. That is the only reason. I think the Austerlitz game is probably better known, but Guns of Gettysburg is probably still better known. So there is a new version from somebody of Bonaparte at Marengo coming, and that's supposed to be the last Simmons game. But Simmons Games as a publisher is no more. I can tell you that. That new version might actually already be out. These are really neat games. Surprising no one. The next entry on the list is Empire of the Sun. This is also a card-driven game, but fairly unusually, although not uniquely, it is a card-driven game with a hex map. This is a great game. It is probably the best single game on the war in the Pacific in World War II. It's certainly not the lightest such game, but any other Pacific game is going to get compared to this, including Mark's own Pacific War. People ask all the time, well, what's the difference? I got Empire of the Sun. What do I need this for? That's a very different experience. This is a strategic level thing. Empire of the Sun or Pacific War is an operational thing. They are quite different experiences, although they do share some underlying logic in the mechanics. I can't really recommend this highly enough. It is like a lot of Mark's games. It really kind of does take effort, and a dedication might be a little too strong a word, but it's not necessarily wrong either. You do have to play a fair amount of this to really get it. and get good at it, unless you're just a genius and can just, oh, I get it immediately and be a master of this at the first whiff. But I personally think this is an amazing game and probably the best game of the last 20 years. Um, Next up is Twilight Struggle. Now, there are those watching this evening who will say, "What? But Twilight Struggle isn't a war game," and I am not inclined to argue with them. However, Twilight Struggle has been extremely important to war games because it's brought more people in as a gateway game to war games. So in that context, and there's one or two other examples here, I think that's why it should be on a list like this, whether you think it's a verbatim war game or not. Bob Kowalczyk, thank you so much for the support, much appreciated. Bob thinks that Pazagoi works as a World War I game because it's a CDG and not a hex encounter traditional game. That I think it's easy to see that, but at the same time, we've just touched on Empire of the Sun, which manages to work despite being both a CDG and a hex encounter game. So I don't know that. I think what you're trying to get at, and I'm going to reframe this a little bit, is that traditional simulation style attempts to handle World War I often resulted in games that were boring to play. Ted looked at it from, hey, we got this cool new idea out of Mark Herman. Let's try this, and worked on it. And probably he may have started on a hex map for all I know. But then again, For the People has a point-to-point map as well. And I think a point-to-point map in World War I makes a lot of sense. Maneuver is not a thing that's particularly important in World War I. I mean, it's more important on the East Front. I realize that, but you do have more breathing room on the point-to-point map on the East Front as well. So, Joe Perez is asking John C. if Empire of the Sun is easy to solo without Erasmus. Erasmus is the solo bot that is included with Empire of the Sun in recent printings. I don't like bots in general. I would just two-hand the thing personally. You are losing a little bit of Fog of War because you know what the other side's hand is. But there's also the CDG solo system. You could adapt that CDG solo system to Empire of the Sun pretty easily, I think, and just run it that way. But I'm personally handling. I'm personally comfortable just handling both sides. We have already defined what a war game is, so we don't need to cover that ever again, right? That's all I'm saying. And I'm not arguing with Mo about this either, for the record. I don't see any value in having that conversation here tonight. The point is that Twilight Struggle is really important because of where it falls on the war game spectrum. It does fall toward the not a war game side of the spectrum. Nobody's going to argue with that. But it's also been associated enough with war games that people drift from it to war games that are war games, right? And that's why it's here. I think it's a really important game, and just you can't deny its impact or popularity. Certainly. All right, next up is Combat Commander. This is another one that's a gateway game like Twilight Struggle, but it's more clearly a war game than Twilight Struggle is. It lives closer to the heart of what war games have traditionally been and done than a Twilight Struggle does. This is also a card-driven game, although not a card-driven game on the Mark Herman model, which Twilight Struggle more or less is. Although, there's now a Twilight Struggle family of card-driven games as well, right? Because that's been so popular. And then includes things like 1989 and Europe in Turmoil and a couple of other things. Combat Commander has spawned a Combat Commander family of card-driven games, which include things like Combat Commander, the Great War, or Great War Commander. That's what it's called, from Hexasim. This is Chad Jensen design, the late Chad Jensen. I am on the record as saying I don't like this game, but there's also no denying its impact. A lot of people love this game. They love the sort of unpredictability of it, and I can appreciate that element. Um, and I'm not gonna, go off for 20 minutes complaining about Combat Commander because I've already done that, and you don't need to hear that again. Um, but this is an important game. Um, Frankly, I feel like GMT has not really capitalized on the popularity of this thing. There really should have been more support for it. This thing is popular enough that it could support like a quarterly magazine with scenarios and stuff. And we haven't seen anything new for Combat Commander in years. So with the possible exception of some stuff in C3I. So I think that's a huge missed opportunity on GMT's part. I recognize that they are thoroughly bottlenecked. But when you are so bottlenecked, maybe the idea is you like get some help rather than just continuing to choke on your own inability to get the product out. So next up, from Stigler's favorite publisher, Decision Games, and designer John Butterfield. This is D-Day at Omaha Beach. This is a solitaire game, but you can very easily play. I'm not sure if this is suggested in the book or not, but you can very easily play this cooperatively with one player. It is the invasion of Omaha Beach on June 6th, 1944, and you play the United States Army amphibiously invading Utah Beach. You can either run the whole beach by yourself or with a partner. One of you can take the 1st U.S. Infantry Division, the other can take the 29th Infantry Division, and that works great. And you play against the game. This is a wonderful game. Very hard to design games like this, and very few people have even tried it that aren't John Butterfield, and even fewer have succeeded. In fact, the only one to have succeeded is John Butterfield. So you'll see a similar but not identical system in the enemy action games from Compass, for example. This is probably the best example of Decision Games releasing an outstanding product. And I feel like you have to give the credit to John Butterfield there, right? Oh, this is fair though. Marty points out that hey, people got to actually design this stuff, and that's obviously correct. It doesn't do any good to say there should be more stuff, but maybe they could have encouraged people or hired paid somebody to design that material. What a revolutionary idea! So there's that. It doesn't have to just be done out of designer goodwill, right? Designers don't have to just sit there and slave over this shit for free. Publishers could actually be paying them to design stuff instead of operating off a pittance of commission after the fact that almost never amounts to anything. So while you're right, that I don't consider that to be a particularly good excuse now that I've said it out loud. Marty mentions that it has a very robust random scenario generator. That's true. That's good design on Chad's part. Nobody's denying that. So, but at the same time, whose pontoon train is this? I have a loose pontoon train. I guess we'll just put it in its own compartment since we're hardly using all of the tray here. That's the whole game, folks. So while this is true, remember that ASL also had, and Squad Leader had a scenario generator as well. And, you still want the official scenarios. Anyway, D-Day at Omaha Beach, great game, great solitaire experience, great cooperative experience, a little hairy to learn, but it's worth your time. There are also some excellent play aids on BGG. There are also a number of other games in the series. I think Butterfield did Palelu and Tarawa, and Joe Youst did Iwo Jima and Saipan. I might be wrong about Saipan, but I'm pretty sure Joe did Iwo Jima, and that one's got some issues from what I hear. So next up is another, I think, gateway game, but we're starting to see the impact of Sekigahara too. There's some really interesting mechanics in here. It's a block game. There's some hidden information. There are also cards. The system here was borrowed by Granada, and there's a couple other Sekigahara inspired games in the works as well. I should add more water down here. I'm dying. But another very important and influential game, and I think it's on the basis of that innovation that that I've put it on this list. I also wanted a list, by the way, tonight that was not gonna carry me into 10:30. So there's that. We have to also mention the elephant in the room, and the elephant's name is coin. I'm choosing Andean Abyss for this. This has had a huge impact on wargame design. We've seen a lot of wargames that have borrowed various things, if not the whole thing, from coin. Andean Abyss started that in 2012, and of course, this is still going strong with GMT sitting on, I don't know, 8 titles on. I don't know. It's probably not 8, but it's several titles on P500 right now that they are unable to actually publish because they can't actually bring all of their products to market that people want to buy. So again, you solve this problem. You don't have enough capacity. You add capacity. It's not exactly rocket science. If I'm sounding a little, I feel like I'm sounding a little pissy about this. GMT as the biggest company in the hobby should be leading the way here, and they're not because they just don't want to add capacity. So next up is Space Empires 4X, and I think this is an interesting. It's a great game first of all, but I think something that it does is it sort of brings back that old school, new ideas in the mechanics, but it's really the same kind of game you might have gotten from SPI back in 1978, right? It proved that there's still a place for the sci-fi hex encounter war game, and I love that. Yeah, I think um, this is the sort of the standard bearer for that kind of game right now. Oh, Marty says it's Space Empire's accounting 4X. Marty, you must never have played Stellar Conquest because that's got twice the paperwork as this does. This does have some paperwork. I mean, this is true. This is true, but that is what it is, right? So I mean, obviously you got to find a balance, right, between capacity and you hired so many people that you can't afford to pay them anymore. Nobody's saying that that's a good idea, but that's kind of a bad faith argument if you think about it. And this is totally true. Absolutely. I am literally sitting in an armchair right now to tell you this. So absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody can really argue that SPI had some management problems. If you read a Farewell to Hexes, a Greg Kostikian piece, it's pretty obvious, as you know, in retrospect, at least. Apparently, they didn't realize it at the time that they were losing money with every game. So, I do not feel that absolutely. Because an empire doesn't run without its bureaucrats, right? So I don't feel like I don't find now some people would tell you something different, right? I mean, there are plenty of people that just don't like doing the paperwork. And there is paperwork in Space Empires 4X. So if you don't like doing the paperwork and think you don't want to play this for that reason, then okay. But I personally am fine with it. It's a pretty light load. I mean, shit, we had a lot of paperwork in Goss, to be honest about it. This is certainly true too. I'm talking here about Mo's thing. Evergreen titles for GMT, titles that they can keep in print, kind of regardless of what the pre-order numbers are. Also, there's actually a lot of stuff from GMT that's like that. Twilight Struggle, the Comic Commander games, the Commands and Colors games. There's plenty of that. Oh yeah, but Fed and Empire is. I mean, you want to talk about bookkeeping? I mean, that many people, I'm not saying I would feel this way, but many people will tell you that Fed and Empire is unplayable without a laptop at the table. So next up is the U.S. Civil War, and I think I'm including this. It's a great game. These are all great games, whether I like them or not. U.S. Civil War kind of brings. I'm gonna walk over myself here and say that I don't agree when people say, "Oh, it's just a new version of the Arkley Smith Civil War for Victory Games." That's not true, and I think that's unfair to this design. But I think this is bringing back. It does. I mean, you read the designer's notes. He does take inspiration from the Victory Games Civil War, and that's a great game. And I'm glad to see some of those ideas brought back into modern games by Mark Simonich with a modern presentation. This is a wonderful game. And there are reasons why it differs from Victory Games Civil War where it does, even if I don't necessarily agree with all of those decisions or how they were handled. I want to say the last game on the list, and then I guess we're just going to talk about whatever, is Last Blitzkrieg. This is what we're playing right now, and this is kind of here as the representative of the Battalion Combat series, which came out in 2016, in which I mean, if you play it, it's like a complete breath of fresh air. They're working on that, though. This at least is in the works. We will eventually see a new 3 Days of Gettysburg. Les Blitzkrieg and BCS in general kind of reimagines warfare at this scale and turns it into a system that's really dynamic, that's really immersive, that really succeeds in putting you in the decision space of the commanders on the spot. Maybe not the historical commanders, because maybe you've got more intel than they did. But you've also got to make historical-like decisions. It makes you think in terms of objectives. It makes you think in terms of, okay, this is what I need to accomplish on the entire map. How do I best do that? What is the best allocation of resources to get to do that? I didn't feel like putting an OCS game on here because I was trying to avoid duplicating designers. And I think BCS, for where we are today, looks more innovative than OCS. I think OCS back in 1995 was more innovative. Well, BCS wasn't around then. Was just as innovative. Civil War Brigade series. I mean, I could name any Dean game or Dean system and say this was super innovative at the time. The one that I think is the most relevant today is BCS. Because it's a completely new take. I mean, you would never have known that Dean is a fella that's 10 years older than I am, if indeed he is that old. You would think this would have been a much younger designer responsible for this. This is the last one. Honestly, I'm not sure any of the Blind Swords games are quite old enough, although I think Stonewall Sword is, without looking it up. And I'm going to tackle James Whitmer's comment as well. I mean, I couldn't get everything here right, but let me pull this down. Let's see if we can get it to actually focus. That would be great. It isn't. There we go. Okay. The old camera, which is way less awesome with lighting, is better for autofocus than this one is. That's disappointed. So Blind Swords actually does something pretty interesting too. It's a pretty conventional hex encounter game with a chit pull mechanic, but it really kind of strips a lot of that stuff away that one would normally get with that kind of game, specifically what you would get when you buy a GBACW game. And turns it into a very streamlined experience. Now, a lot of detail is removed in that process, and that might be detail that you want, but at least gives you the option of having this much lighter, much faster playing system. James Whitmer asked, why are we not seeing more Eastern Front BCS games? Isn't that front better suited for that system? Generally, yes, I actually think so. Although the Bulge is a good one. And Market Garden is a good one, and that's in the works. And the Aracore situation is a good one, but it's pretty small too, which is kind of part of the point of Aracore after all. Um, but there's plenty of stuff on the East Front, and there are several East Front BCS games in development. Um, One of the things that I feel like I've seen from multi-man, and I guess this is I'm blaming Dean for this, is that the say line of battle, and you get your first game on Antietam, big battle, popular battle, people love it, it sells out. Second game is on Gettysburg, big battle, people know the battle, people love it, it sells out. Third game is on Monocacy and Fort Stevens, which is a battle that relatively few people know about, even fewer people think is interesting, although it is. And that took because there hasn't been a follow up, and that's the latest game in the series and has been for several years. I think that's taken a lot of gas out of that series. So there is value in kind of tackling popular topics too, right? I mean, there was a good reason to do the Bulge first in BCS. And BCS has had some evolution since then, right? And speaking of which, Line of Battle is getting a Line of Battle 3.0 system. I talked a little bit to Dean about that in last week's show. We're going to probably try and pull Dean into a more detailed interview at some point. John C, thanks for the support, much appreciated. As a gaming neighbor, that's great. There's so this has been talked about, like stuff in the Pacific has been talked about as got potential for BCS. And there are a couple of things that sound like they would be suitable. A lot of it won't be, though. All that jungle fighting is just not going to work, because of the way the system works. BCS is going to be good at certain kinds of engagements and bad at other kinds of engagements. And jungle fighting and static, assaulting of fortified positions and stuff like that is not generally the strength of BCS. Something like Panzer's Last Stand with the city fighting is kind of approaching the upper limit of what BCS should be called upon to do with that. In this case, I'm defining them as games that have had impact, whether that's because they've been super popular or because they have been innovative and influential. That was my correct. This list is all over the place. You're absolutely right, but it's my perspective on that too. So bear that in mind. This is a fair point as well. Joe Perez says that a lot of the good East Front actions involve deep penetration battles, which would require a lot of BCS map space. Smaller battles are the meat grinders. That's true, and even something like Panzer's Last Stand, which takes place over, if you play that out in Hungarian Rhapsody, the OCS game, you'll find that it takes place on a really small corner of the Hungarian Rhapsody map. Another thing to bear in mind is that, part of the point of these conversations is that they're conversations, and that this is what I picked. I want to hear folks that, what you folks think are the new classics too. Graffiti Albion says BCS for the range of North African battles, with the exception of really large battles like Elemencan Crusader. Well, we do have Crusader, Operation Crusader, right? That's Brazen Chariots. So, and as Sigler points out, the 2023 series rules for GBACW did just come out. You can download those now. There are some changes. So, Roger, I'm wondering whose BCS playthrough you watched. Was it the Tabletop's Edge? Because I think that's the one that's really going to show you. It's kind of a big time investment to watch it, but that's the one that's going to kind of show you what that system does. I think the best, and I think that frankly, Last Blitzkrieg is probably the best game in the series still that does that, right? So BCS has a somewhat flexible hex scale, but I want to say that certainly Aracore and last Blitzkrieg are 1 mile to the hex, which is not an atypical battalion scale. OCS on the east front is 5 miles to the hex. OCS on the west front is 3.5 miles to the hex, unless you're playing Sicily, Triumphant Folly, in which case it's 2.5 miles to the hex. Warfighter is one that I missed because I haven't played it, and I don't think it's important. I don't think Warfighter has had that much impact. I could be wrong. I'll be happy to be corrected on that by the large and angry Warfighter community that I've just offended. But next war series, yeah, maybe. I'm, I don't feel like I feel like those are really excellent games, and I'm not sure why they don't get more attention than they do. Crete might be interesting, yeah. Although parts of that were a meat grinder as well. Doug from the Tabletop's Edges here. Welcome back, Doug. Yeah, so I'm not sure that the desert ones are at that same 1 mile per hex. I'd have to check. They may be at a slightly different scale, and it says in the series rules that we may vary the scale from game to game. But generally, it's about 1 mile per hex. Dale Brady has ordered Napoleon's Wheel. Fantastic. Yeah, and this is now there are people playing them, right? So there's it was a Next War convention that turned where they just played Next War, that turned into Kansas City Historical Games Festival, whatever it's called. It could be that there's just not enough games coming out fast enough, but we've seen pretty regular traffic in the Next War space over the last few years, so I don't think that's it. So, Prophetic Albion, as far as scale is concerned, yes, this is true, but the mechanics between there is some kind of shared identity and logic behind both systems. Okay. But the way you actually execute things in BCS is vastly different from the way it is in OCS. And I don't know that you're saying this or trying to say that BCS is just the battalion level OCS, because that's how Dean started it. It was just like, well, let's do OCS at battalion level. And it turned into something that's completely different from that. WIF came out in the early 90s, I want to say. That sounds approximately correct. So it wouldn't have qualified on this list based on my completely arbitrary date range that I set down. John Stanley mentions Liberty Roads, which is a Hexasim game. It is a well-regarded game. I'm on record as saying I don't like the counters, but other than that, it's supposed to be a really good game. Tabletop's Edge says the fighting in the Dnieper Bend, July, August 1942, prior to 6th Army reaching Stalingrad. Great fit for BCS. Yeah, so one of the topics for BCS that's in the works is, I forget the name of the game or the name of the battle, but it's part of either the breakout of 6th Army or more likely the other Germans trying to break back in to relieve 6th Army, which of course is not a thing that actually was successful historically. Abrexis MF says, speaking of Ukraine, Mark Herman posted some pics on Twitter today of a war in Ukraine game he's working on. So I have previously expressed my reservations about a game on this topic, not because it's going to be controversial, but because I am not sure we have sufficient information. That said, we have more information now than we did, and if there's anybody that I would trust to do that and make it good, anyway, it is probably Mark. And Mark has probably access to and ways to get access to information that would be hard for the rest of us to get. Not classified information as such, but I strongly suspect that Mark knows who to talk to get the straight dope on what's going on over there. Filtering out all the various nonsense that we might see on Twitter, for example. Okay, hold on a second. Somebody's mentioning Victory in the West. This is true. I mean, there's a lot of SPI games that have a chit pool that you draw chits from. Outreach does this. There's a number of other games that do this. When we start talking about the chit pull activation mechanism, which is generally what we're talking about when we say it's a chit pull war game, that originated with Panzer Command Victory Games, Eric Lee Smith in the mid 80s. So while there were, various things in which you'd pull a random chit for something, it wasn't like, oh, what do I move next? Who's going now? It was just, hey, I need an event or something like that. You'd get a pool of chits. Um, it's a mechanism that for that purpose you could just as easily use cards, but cards are more expensive to produce. So Doug points out that with first edition was in 1985. I certainly did not play first edition. I think I came into it with the fourth edition. That's my recollection. I might be, it could have been third. It definitely wasn't first or second. Garrison Venn asks, is the current GMT the next war the same as SPI's the next war? No, it is not. So I guess the SPI game is the next war, and the GMT games are next war Korea, next war Iran, whatever it is, right? The next war back in the day was hypothetical near future conflict, and the GMT next war series is hypothetical near future conflict, as opposed to past hypothetical conflict, right? It's kind of where the GMT Next War series is kind of where that approach to games was back in the late 70s and early 80s, and which kind of got left behind for a long time. Carl, did you just super chat it? Wait a minute. Did I miss something? Carl, thanks very much. Much appreciated. Okay. Yeah. It wasn't actually your comment that I was riffing on there, Carl. Thank you. Much appreciated. So if you want to see something that descends kind of from the SPI, Mark Kerman, Jim Dunnigan Next War, you'll need to check out the ruinously expensive 1985 series from Thin Red Line Games. God damn this focus thing. I felt like it didn't do this for a long time. Maybe it's the light. Maybe I just need more light. That might fix it. Yep, the Don Ben. That's a good point. And A Distant Plane was released in 2013, right? So I'm a little unclear. Perfidious Albion asks about the system that Berg pioneered with Glory, which is a Civil War system that was adopted for Napoleonics in Triumph and Glory and the Borodino game that GMT did. And then it was adapted into Jour de Gloire by Frederick Bay, who has kept it going for many years now and probably coverage of like 50 battles. So there's like designer DNA in, Berg did Glory, and Glory is kind of a lighter version of his revision of GBACW, right? It's a chit pull system, and then at least I think it's a chit pull system, and then because I've never played Glory, although I played GBACW, I'm unclear as to the exact lineage between Glory and Triumph and Glory. Although, name wise, it certainly suggests a connection. I looked at the Glory games and did not really find them interesting enough for me, so I never picked any of them up. But I never played them, so they could be great for all I know. Year of the Rat, published in the same year. It takes place in Vietnam. This is all true, but how good's your information? And that's my reservation about that, about designing that contemporary game. If you feel like you've got good information, then I say go for it. And I kind of trust Mark to have better information than me, right? So I would say Churchill is too recent might be wrong about that. I would, I think Churchill is terrific. Um, I don't, however, feel that Churchill has had a big crossover impact. It's not a war game, and I don't think it's a particularly been a gateway game into wargaming in the way that Twilight Struggle has, whether you think Twilight Struggle is a war game or not. This sounds like this number sounds like an exaggeration, but hey, all I know is with the list I saw on BGG, but there are a lot, and it might be more than 50. I'm not sure. And you know what? There's this variable strength chit mechanism. They don't have to be chits, by the way. Ted's Fall of the Third Reich uses variable strength that's determined every time you get the unit in combat. You roll on a table and see what the combat strength is. That's super interesting. Brant, thanks for stopping by. Much appreciated. Um, and I haven't tried that to see how well it works, but I suspect that it works fine. But the variable strength chit thing has never quite gone away. I mean, you had the variable combat series from MMP that they tried to kind of resuscitate the idea with. You've had various other attempts to do Victory in the West, and now even Decision is saying, "Hey, maybe it would be cool if we did another Victory in the West game." Wow, it's only been like 30 years that has taken you to think of that. What a genius! So they're talking about that. That's great. I'd love to see that. And right now, I feel like the leaders in that space are New England Simulations with Jaws of Victory and Compass with Fallblau and Kharkov Battles. I think those are the best examples of the variable strength chit pull. Now I said chit pull the same as everybody else, right? The variable strength as drawn by chits mechanism. I think those are the best examples that we have right now. And hell, that's why I went and ran down a copy of Operation Typhoon, which doesn't do quite the same thing, but it is a relative of that system. So Stigler says that Victor in the West did not pioneer variable strength chits. That's an evolution, right? And the idea does not first appear in Victory in the West. That's absolutely right. But you first saw it with the unknown strength or undetermined, whatever it's called in PGG. And then, the idea gradually evolved over the course of a couple of games until we got what we got in Victory in the West. But that's an evolution, right? That's not just an idea materializing out of the ether. Somebody dug up an unexploded shell on the Gettysburg battlefield recently, by the way. Perfidious Albion says Churchill's is really a political strategy game within the context of World War II, not a traditional hexagon or war game, but interesting nevertheless. I agree with all of that, and I think Mark Herman agrees with that too, because he has said on numerous occasions that Churchill is not a war game. I think there is a war element to it, but the war element is like one dimension out of like 8 and isn't any more important than any of the others. So I mean, they might. It's always possible. It's easy to foresee that potential possibility, because they're trying. They're trying. I appreciate that they're trying. Let's hope they get it right someday. Third World War from Compass. This is the new version's too recent, and the old version's too old to fall into the category here. Although I think the new version of Third World War is a great product. Happy to say that we're playing it in Origins this year. I'm happy to do that again. Okay. So it just didn't fall into the time range. Is well that worked. Graffiti's Albion's apparently I'm very tired today. New England Simulation with Killing Ground and Course on Pocket. Of course, made me think of Course on Pocket 2, which just came out from Pacific Rim, We'll have an unboxing of that coming along. It's a buddy unboxing. But I think their first hit at that system was Killing Ground, New England Simulations. Jim, I don't know if it's thousands, right? I don't think that Twilight Struggle is going to make people that play other kinds of games stop playing those other kinds of games and come over to playing Case Blue, right? If that is the expectation, then I don't think we're going to be pleased at the outcome. But certainly it's raised the profile. And I absolutely think that there's some people that have gotten introduced to other war games through Twilight Struggle, even if they're not necessarily the people showing up at Winterfest to play Vakdam Rhine for a week, right? But they may be the people showing up to play pickup games at Gonson World Expo. Mo points out that VUCA's using variable strength chits in across the Bug River, which is one that I haven't looked at yet. I've got what's it called? Crossing the Line. I always want to call it Crossing the Rhine, which is the Rhine is nearby, but Donnerschlag are the ones I've looked at. I haven't seen I've seen it, but I haven't played it. And I don't own it. And VUCA's putting out some really interesting things, and they're I think one of the top up and coming companies in the wargaming space right now. Drew Detterer says that modern classics have a lot of CNC rules. What's the status of Zox? So interestingly, rather few games nowadays have the sort of hard, rigid Zox that you associated with the old SPI games. I won't say that never appears anymore, but it doesn't appear very often. Much more often, pretty much since then, we've seen softer Zocs in some way. Or we've seen, say, the Zoc bond mechanic, which the bond is really, really hard, but the Zoc itself is a bit on the soft side. And I don't know how to explain it without actually going through the rule. But we should do more content on the Zoc bond games. I won't argue with that. Vince Reese says that untried units originated with Invasion America. That may be Invasion America was that early? Are we right about that? I didn't feel like Invasion America was that early. Panther Group Udarian is fairly early. Invasion America is 1976. Panther Group Udarian is 1976, according to this. You have to actually look at the numbers here. So it sounds like they might have showed up at the same time. And it wouldn't shock me exactly if they both were designed by Jim Dunnigan. They were. How about that? So Dunnigan spreading his ideas around multiple projects in the office at the time. In either case, we're blaming Jim Dunnigan for the phenomenon. Perfidious Albion does say that it points out that Musket and Pike falls into that category as well, but I don't really feel like Musket and Pike gets a lot of attention. That is, I think a little unfortunate, but maybe due in part to I've heard people say that they found the rulebook difficult. Let me put it that way. I don't like to play too much Twilight Struggle for this exact reason. So I guess I'll talk about this a little bit. So our objective was to make the big drive up the middle, and the flanks of that were we were going to protect the flanks to the extent that we could, and B, we were going to try and put as much pressure on the Americans as possible to divert forces. So I was very aggressive with German 7th Army, and I took a lot of losses, right? I pushed way farther forward than they got historically. We again, pinned. They were the Fourth Army, Fourth U.S. Infantry Division was never out of supply. They were never like seriously cut off or anything like that. But um, they uh, they couldn't go anywhere. They didn't have enough power to force their way out. And once I started putting pressure on them with Führerbegleit, then they had no choice but to run some divisions down there. So by the time toward the end of the game, they had like 5 divisions down there trying to break Fourth Infantry and what was left of the CCA or whatever it was of the Ninth Armored out of that pocket, and they did succeed. But we did do a lot of damage to them in the meantime, took a lot of damage as well. And we tied down a bunch of stuff that could otherwise have been counterattacking up west of Bastogne. So I was very happy with that outcome as far as that goes. William Aarons, thank you so much. William says that any game on Ukraine should include scenarios that changing levels of NATO support would have on the conflict and Russian reaction to NATO actions. Sure, I'll agree with that. I think that would be. I don't know what the scope of what Mark's working on is. It sounds like it is just the battle for Kiev. And in that case, I think you still need to model effect of foreign support for Ukraine. So it's being pointed out that SPI themselves said that the untried units came from Invasion America. And that's probably true, but it's Panzer Group Guderian that I think has the more enduring impact in people's memories. People remember that coming from Panzer Group Guderian. And I haven't seen it in Invasion America either. So was it the same, exactly the same? I don't know, because we saw that mechanism drift as more and more games came out that borrowed those ideas, right? And eventually we got to Victory in the West. And that took a few years. Clark Commando 1983, Mark, welcome. Hope you're doing okay. Round 2. Yep. We're all there with you, Mark. Perfidious Albion says that several of the GMT systems qualify, such as Prussia's Glory or the air combat game systems from Lee Brimacombe Wood. I'm not sure I'd agree with that. I think there's a lot of good games in there, and I think Musket and Pike looks good to me. Prussia's Glory, I never hear anybody talking about, hey, I played Prussia's Glory. What I do see is Prussia's Glory for sale for $20. So that makes me think that maybe it's a game system that may have been good, but has been largely forgotten. The Lee Brimacombe Wood air games, on the other hand, maybe they don't get played that much, but part of that is because they're kind of hard to get. And those do go for large amounts of money. And those Downtown, I think, is the obvious example. Another thing is, I could have listed another 10 GMT games, and I didn't want to list 10 more GMT games. So that's a problem too. Random Russian unit counter combat effectiveness. I think this would be great for the Ukraine game. I think you should have a pool of random Russian combat strengths, and they should all be 0 and 1. I think that is a great way to simulate the progress of the current. Jeff, they were. I mean, I'm saying pocketed, but they were able to draw supply. They were not. It would be possible to cut them off if they weren't on a road, but they were. So they were at no point were they out of supply. But they were. Once I started leaning on them, I was going to reduce that pocket sooner or later. Stigler says there's a Tweezer nightmare waiting to happen in Invasion America, and I again, it's kind of got a cool map, to be honest. It's got a big mounted map, full size mounted map that's a hex map of North America. So I do kind of think it's cool looking, but at the same time, it's like not a topic I'm interested in. So I never really looked at it. Yeah, and the having now played Red Storm, I don't know that I'd necessarily agree that it's operational. But and I think downtown to be basically the same scale. I could correct me on that if that's wrong. But the I wouldn't go so far as to call it an operational game, and I know I have done that. But it's definitely got some operational aspects to it, which I do appreciate. I didn't add a GTS game. You're right. I could have easily added a GTS game, but the GTS games are. I think GTS is another system that doesn't get as much traction or attention as it deserves. So we didn't talk Panzer yet. Panzer's. I don't know if I would consider Panzer in category because Panzer is a revision of an old James Day game from Yaquinto, I think. So does it count? I'm not sure it counts. I'm not sure it doesn't, but I'm not sure that it does. Um, Chadwick's ETO series, I'm not sure it falls in there date wise. It might. I think that series has tons of potential. Um, and I'd like to see them. I don't know if it's a Frank thing necessarily, but I'd like to see them actually get that thing like moving forward. And I think they are moving forward. It's just been slow, and it's a huge project and all that. As long as we get them eventually, I'm happy with that. I think that's got a lot of potential. I think that um it might be a landscape changer if they can get it all done and make it all playable together. You're still dogfighting, man. You're still running dogfights. That's tactical. Um, there are operational things about it, but you're still running dogfights. So you're still firing individual missiles. So MBT is another one. MBT was kind of the modern companion game to Panzer back in the day, but MBT was done by Avalon Hill and then brought back by GMT. Slightest bit of interest in that. Jordan McMullen, thanks for stopping by. I don't see you around here often enough. No narrative or dedicated solo games. You did see a dedicated solo game. You saw D-Day at Omaha Beach. And again, there were a couple others that came up. I mean, it'd be very tempting to put the Hunters in, for example, and I didn't want to. Um, I didn't want to eat the whole list up with solitaire games either. I also considered Field Commander Napoleon. You are flying the individual flights hex by hex and determining facing for the individual units. This is tactical. This is just as tactical as Luftwaffe. Okay. I am exaggerating slightly when I'm saying you're firing individual missiles. You're not like making maneuver rolls inside the hex or anything. But the movement of the planes is pretty tactical. Solo games could be their own show, and I think they kind of should be, right? No lock and load games. That's selection bias. Frankly, that's me not playing any lock and load games. Be delighted to provide them tons and tons of coverage when they bring back Trial of Strength. But until then, they don't have anything that I'm interested in. It's all tactical stuff. And I'm just not that into tactical stuff. You can have Stigler, you can have tactical where the unit consists of more than one person. So a squad level game is still tactical. Even if you're not mapping the planes out like Age of Sail ships and Wooden Ships and Iron Men. There we go. Yeah, I don't know where that's at. At this point, I'm about to declare that vaporware. I don't think that's ever going to come out. Why are we talking about the Chinese balloons again? This is an arbitrary. This is Stigler says that an aircraft tactical is single aircraft, but that's completely arbitrary. An individual fighting man, you could declare that in an infantry game, tactical is a single person, and there have been games with single people. Generally, the level of detail that we're willing to deal with is appropriate to having it handle one aircraft, and that's fine. But there's nothing that says that you're not just doing the operational planning and then making sending the planes to the target and then rolling a die roll on a table to see whether they come back or not. You're individually hex by hex flying the planes there. You are maneuvering hex to hex on en route, and to me that's tactical. So regardless of whether there might be 3 planes in the flight or not. I am not saying that it is a purely tactical game, by the way, Rod, or just to clarify this. I am saying that it has tactical elements. There are also operational elements, but it's not a purely tactical or operational game. I mean, tons and tons of examples exist of individual dogfighting games where you're flying 1 or 2 planes at a time, right? And you have control over the individual planes. Luftwaffe, I want to. I mean, the better example is Wooden Ships and Iron Men for ships, right? But if you have a what is tactical, right? I mean, you're maneuvering, but you're maneuvering a ship, but you could maneuver a task force. You're firing individual weapon systems. To me, the where the distinction I think falls is if the game is trying to model individual weapon systems, which that system does. To me, that's another tactical element. Yes, but we're not, with rare exceptions, we're not modeling individual weapon systems. So I haven't seen Bloody April. There is some variation in those games, by the way. That some of them drift from place to place, and I guess I'm specifically talking about Red Storm because that's the one I've played. Rob Johnson says if facing matters, it's tactical. That's another element. Facing does matter. In Red Storm. Not sure it does in Downtown, but I believe the system's fairly similar. I'm also not sure about Bloody April. Bloody April looks interesting, actually. I'd love to see that. To me, that the sweet spot of that operational air thing is actually in what's it called? The Battle of Britain game. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the Lee Brimacum Wood. And that to me, again, it still has some tactical aspects, which, this is fine, by the way. It's traditional for war games to kind of drift the decision space up and down. But that's not to say we can't identify the individual levels within the game. Virtually no war games are completely one or completely the other, right? I mean, we've got tons of what we call strategic level World War II games that have loads of operational detail. That's completely traditional. The Burning Blue is the game I'm thinking of. Yes. Unit of maneuver is Table says unit of maneuver in RAF is squadron, not flight. And I would consider RAF operational. Actually, much more so than again Red Storm. I'd call flat top. Flat top is again, and there's nothing wrong with us saying this thing does not perfectly fit into this one container. It's in 2 containers. Okay. There are tactical aspects and operational aspects to flat top. I would consider it more an operational game because you're kind of getting a picture of the whole theater, which you also are in Red Storm, to be fair. So Grand Tactical is where, as Aaron Dennis points out, Grand Tactical is where things get wibbly wobbly. And Grand Strategic is, or just Strategic, I guess, is when things get wibbly wobbly. is I mean, even the inside one of those containers, right? There's operational, okay, I got operational Mark Simonich game that's Ukraine 42, and then I have a game about literally the same topic, Case Blue, that's 6 times as big, has 5 times as many counters, and takes a million times as long to play. So, I mean, these are not narrow absolute on off switches, right? There's room for nuance here. I didn't I don't know anything about the white screen. All right, folks, we are out of time. So I'm going to wish you adieu for the evening. Thanks for coming in. Please remember to thumbs up the video and subscribe to the channel if for some bizarre reason you are not subscribed already. I will be making the reveal of the Thursday show on Wednesday. Thursday at 9 p.m. There will be a live stream. It will be very impressive. So you should all tune in for that. And then we've got an unboxing also Thursday. I have a what else do I have coming out this week? Do I have I forget what I have coming out this week. Hold on, I'm gonna find out. The unboxing for the week is Drop Zone St. Mariglis. The Wednesday video will actually be the patrons only live stream from a couple of weeks ago on 3D printing for wargaming. So you might be interested in that. And it's only about an hour and 20 minutes, as I recall. So it's not like you got to sit through a million years of me blathering at you. So tune in for that. Your support for the channel is always much appreciated. Check out the link to the Patreon in the notes below. I really need an outro video for this, and I just haven't put one together yet. And I'm running at the I'm running at the edge of exhaustion here, folks. So we've gotten a lot done this week, and I feel like I have not exactly been super on top of my game, but we still had fun anyway. So thanks everybody for stopping by. We will see you all tomorrow. And I'm not sure whether we're on my channel or Dan's channel. I am going to send Dan an email about that tomorrow. I don't care, but it'll be on one or the other. So just, you should have notifications on for both channels anyway, folks. So we'll be live at 7:30 tomorrow. Then we'll have a video on Wednesday, a video on Thursday, a very important, fantastic live stream on Thursday night. Maybe there'll be something on Friday, and I've got at least 2 more Winterfest videos to get out over the next week or two as well. So stay tuned. Once again, thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.